I think there are two powerful corrupting forces often at play in the stories we tell. And those are money and the allure of vast riches. And the other is the intoxicating quality of power. These things drive people to cross boundaries and to forget themselves and to do things that perhaps they, in their natural selves, wouldn't necessarily have wanted to do. I'm often asked as an investigative journalist whether I get scared doing this kind of work. And my honest answer has always been no. I have to say that changed working on this story.
A murder investigation being launched into the death of another Russian on British soil.
He told his uncle a fortnight before he died, if anything happens to me in the next 2 weeks, it won't be an accident.
Мама, не вернусь, прости, я не один. Пули как грибы, боли не растут, спущенные штаны меня выдают. Пушки Маузер, гангстер Тайзер, денежки на стол, я этой ночью супервайзер. Время умирать, время выпускать коктейль.
London is levitating on a sea of dirty money.
Время умирать, время выпускать коктейль.
If you deal with somebody who has a very suspicious track record, someday it will come back to haunt you.
Улицы кишат духом враждующих миров. На моем плече набито, я на все готов.
In 2014, BuzzFeed approached me about setting up an investigations team in London. I knew BuzzFeed for its lists and quizzes and cat-related content. I was like, aren't you guys the cat people? But I'd worked at a couple of newspapers with declining circulations, and BuzzFeed really seemed like a great opportunity to do something new and innovative, and so it felt like a no-brainer. Very shortly after I arrived in the newsroom, my first week in the job, I got a call come through for me on the switchboard. And it was from somebody who didn't want to identify herself, but she asked me to come and meet her at an address in a smart part of London. And so I went to this apartment. My interest was piqued. And kind of climbed the stairs and knocked on the door, and the door swung open, and it was Michelle Young, who I knew from one of the longest ever divorce cases in British legal history. Her husband was Scott Young, the multi-millionaire super fixer for some of the world's richest men. This is a man who had a supposed total net worth of about £400 million. But when it came to the divorce case, his whole fortune had apparently gone up in a puff of smoke, and he had claimed to be penniless.
If I had £20 million tomorrow, would you be happy? Yes or no? I will get cracking on a couple of ventures.
I'm tighting for a wife in a very long marriage.
Okay, let's just say 25, because it's a nice round number. Okay?
Well, no, I don't want 25. It's about 30
Do
million.
a fucking deal, or do you not want to do a deal? How can you ask for any more than that?
After billions of pounds being hidden, and I've got the evidence.
Okay, you can round up the sweet fuck all. Okay, Michelle, on that basis, it's a waste of time. Never threaten me again.
He was ordered to pay about £20 million to Michelle. And the money never materialised. Scott never paid up. And then, around a year later,
Bankrupt property tycoon Scott Young has died after reportedly falling onto railings outside a luxury flat in central London. Police say Young's death is not being treated as suspicious.
Testing, Jane Bradley. I'm at Michelle's house. Testing.
Heidi first mentioned Scott Young's name to me pretty much as soon as I got the BuzzFeed job. So we went to do the big interview with her, where I was the camera and filmed the interview.
Yeah, ready.
Jade, it's your job to make this look good.
Pretty much from 12, I was just always nosy, I was curious, I loved writing, I loved asking questions. So for a really long time, I'd known I wanted to be a journalist. So when this story came through, I thought, wow, this will be a really kind of interesting, murky story to look into.
What do you want to say about how you believe he died?
I just very, very honest. The fact, I don't believe he committed suicide. I don't believe he fell. I believe he was murdered.
Michelle believed that whoever had killed him was hiding his money from her, and she wanted me to investigate and get to the bottom of who had killed him and where the money had gone.
Just after 5 p.m. on the 8th of December 2014, Scott Young fell from that 4th floor window and was impaled on these railings here. The impact killed him instantly.
His death was this quite extraordinary, grisly fall from his penthouse window. I was intrigued by how he had come to meet such an untimely end and what the secrets of the story really were.
So you want me to start looking up, then look down, or start looking at you, then look up, then look down? Start looking down, okay.
I never believed he committed suicide. I was just shocked, traumatised. Just before Scott's death, he was in the show Ladies of London with his current girlfriend, Noelle Reno.
Please.
Thank you. You're not going to carry me in?
I will carry you in.
Scott was obviously very good at acting. I wouldn't say an A-class actor, I'd say a B-class actor.
We're looking the Sunday Times set. Yeah.
Yeah.
She was in the fashion section, I was in the crime section.
Things haven't changed. Match made in tabloid heaven. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it was quite clear he was still living a very luxurious lifestyle.
Scott, how are you? Tell me about the new place.
Enjoying it, yeah, we're feeling settled there, we got in, we love the area.
We're happy for now.
Great.
When Scott had been found dead, after everything that had happened, I was just utterly shocked.
Michelle had this very large amount of documentation and digital evidence in relation to Scott Young, much of which had come out during the disclosure process of her divorce battle with Scott over 8 years. We ended up with 250 boxes of documents. And so we were going to be able to really thoroughly investigate what happened to Scott Young. The first question was, how are we going to get our heads around this volume of material? That was where Richard Holmes came into the picture.
When I found out that BuzzFeed was putting money into investigative journalism, I wanted to be part of that. I first reached out to Heidi, I think, on Twitter, and then followed up with an email. And I don't think she initially responded to that email.
He'd been bugging me on Twitter for months, saying that he really wanted a job with us.
I took it upon myself to send her about 3 emails a month for about 3 months until she finally got back to me.
I was like, hang on, we have this very eager young potential helper and we have an enormous quantity of information. So we hired Richard and told him his mission was to scan every single one of those documents by hand. And Richard was more than game for the task.
There's 250 plus boxes here, and they want me to scan them all. Heidi said if you could get that done in a month, that would be great.
He'd been having to tear the staples out of each of these documents with his bare hands. Shocking.
When we started looking into all this unseen evidence, and then the bigger picture really became apparent, it kind of became a focus for the whole team, which was really rare, but that was kind of how important a story Heidi felt it was.
So my background in journalism, I did a lot of what they call data journalism. It was kind of the geeky stuff, do you know what I mean? That was kind of my flex. The abridged answer as to why I wanted to be an investigative reporter is like, you know, you just want to fuck shit up. And we spent months on end just looking at documents about Scott's life, and you build up a picture of who this person is, you know? To be honest, you know, I kind of came to admire him because it is like the rags to riches tale. So he's born in a tenement in Dundee. This is not like a guy who's born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Grows up, he gets into club promoting.
He was very charming, lots of charisma. He was extremely funny. I kind of couldn't get rid of him. He was kind of there, and, you know, after a couple of dates, he said, I'm going to marry you and you're going to have my babies. And at the time, I just thought, yeah, sure. But I did marry him. We had 2 beautiful daughters, living a very happy family life. And the rest was history.
How and when did you first meet Scott Young?
Well, he pulled up in a brand new red Ferrari and he climbed the curb, so it stood out like a sore thumb. I never saw him in the same car ever. Ferraris, Porsches, Bentleys, everything. And his wife did say he had a car for every day of the week. I think he had a new car for every day of the year. When I met him, it seemed everybody knew him, and he knew everybody else, you know. He was a character. He was definitely a character. I think he wanted to be the richest man on the planet. Very impressive. Nice guy, shook his hand, great, and, you know, we good friends from then onwards. We had lunch together 5 days of the week. He was always up to something. He was always doing deals all over the place.
He had a lot of very good high-tech startup companies. That was where he'd already made a majority of his fortune.
From that, he bought some magnificent houses. He had a vast array of property.
But, you know, he worked very long hours, so, you know, he was at home when he could be.
At the same time, Scott had become the fixer if you wanted to hide a dubious trail of money.
He got involved with, like, one of Britain's biggest crime families.
The Addams family. One of London's and the country's longest established organised crime gangs.
Scott became particularly close to one of the bosses of that family. He was helping them legitimise their ill-gotten earnings.
I had no idea the people that he'd been involved with over many years.
There are stories of Scott going to nightclubs and spending £50,000 on coke and spraying champagne across the crowd.
Flying on private jets and holidaying on yachts.
He was talking about ordering a yacht, a helicopter, and we was looking at substantial houses.
Scott had been playing away from home for a long time. He had a whole series of different girlfriends, living his own life, separate and apart from his family. This was the kind of lifestyle he led. It was one of just kind of breathtaking luxury, but also an increasing cloud of danger.
I am Kaveh Mousavi. I am a human rights lawyer. I'm an international arbitrator, and I like to think we do well by the law and by justice. In 1996, I saw this beautiful house and we fell in love with it. It had a tremendous history. One of the extensions was my office, and that's where I was working on that fateful Sunday when Scott Young turned up. He was driving past and he'd seen the house, and his wife and he had decided there and then that they wanted to buy this house. He was the usual Scots. I have a plane to catch and I've got Concorde at 6 o'clock. I'm in a hurry, make up your mind right now. And then the penny dropped. He wanted to buy this house, cash. I said, Scott, I can't do that. I cannot take millions of pounds in cash. He said, I'll help you set up an account in Switzerland and I will deposit the cash and it'll be banking secrecy. I said, Scott, you know, we're here on a short journey and I really want to try and make it to that without too many problems. But I mean, there are rules here. We managed eventually to overcome those problems. He was able to organize a banking arrangement and so the house was sold. And the last I heard was that he was impaled on the railings in London. But when you look at the unsavory activities that we now know Scott was involved in, the old adage, if you sleep with dogs, don't expect not to catch fleas.
Scott's two daughters, Sasha and Scarlett, didn't learn of their father's death until some days after the event. And they couldn't quite believe that he had died. They knew that he had checked himself into a secure psychiatric unit days before and wasn't yet due to have left, so they believed him still to be safely there.
Scott struggled for years with substance abuse. People were worried about his mental well-being.
Well, it started, you know, early on in our relationship, and he had this really bad temper. And for no reason, he would just throw things, be quite violent. And, you know, it was actually shocking to actually see, you know, someone for no reason would just basically turn into this psychopath. This happens a lot. Very powerful people, they have this very domineering side. But, you know, I fell in love with him, you know, and you take the good with the bad.
Before he died, basically, he'd had an episode. He'd come in for cocaine-induced psychosis. This was something that should tail off, and afterwards he should have been okay.
When he died, Scott had actually come from the psychiatric hospital that day and checked himself out and come back to the flat where Noel Reno was just about to have the locks changed on the flat because they had recently broken up.
Noel Reno was the last one to see him alive. Apparently they was having an argument and she asked him to leave the apartment and he wouldn't. And she said she went off to have a coffee.
The story then goes that Scott called Noelle and told her that he was going to jump out of the window.
And within 15 minutes of her leaving, he was found dead.
She told the police that she believed he killed himself. And it was her testimony that Scott told her he was going to jump that really swung the police, you know, into making this determination that he definitely committed suicide. What's kind of left out of that story is that Scott had told his friends that he believed that there were hit squads out to get him. He feared he was going to be poisoned. He believed that his life was in danger. He'd asked for police protection.
Scott became very mentally unstable. There were issues that he was having, and it was trying to look at those and take those into account, but also look at the external threat that there was to Scott.
Scott had a pattern of when he felt he was under threat, checking himself into psychiatric hospitals. And there were several occasions where he specifically told his daughters he'd done that because he was frightened and he felt it was a safe place to avoid people he felt were coming to kill him. He got admitted to showing all kinds of signs of mania and, you know, florid delusions. And then as soon as the threat had passed, suddenly he was magically better again and ready to discharge himself.
He thought there was people following him. If anyone come and sat next to us, he said they're following him, and I used to think it was all nonsense, but I found out later in life that it wasn't nonsense, they were following him.
And the last time he admitted himself to psychiatric hospital, he was frightened. He believed people were after him. He told people he was going to be lying low in there for a few days.
When I was told that he was dead, the whole thing did not add up. I knew there was something seriously wrong, because there's no way Scott would have jumped out of that window. He was absolutely petrified of heights. What happened to Scott's laptops? What happened to all his mobile phones?
There are so many things about Scott's death that point to suspicious circumstances. The police went in, they didn't dust for fingerprints, they took a few photos of the scene. They performed very little forensic investigation. We are left with burning questions about whether his death was in fact a suicide.
We had such a plethora of information. You got insight into his emails, into his phone records, into his transactional data, and I really started to develop a sense for who this guy was. It was clearly a man who wasn't this ultra-wealthy individual who was very stable and standing on a huge amount of wealth. He was clearly someone who was, frantically taking money from wherever he could just to pay off people that he'd previously loaned off. It became clear that there were people who he was trying to escape from. The moment the penny really dropped was when I read an email that he sent, and he said, "Don't call the house phone. We've had murders." You can see this flurry of text messages and emails to people saying, "I'll get you your money." And as I read on more and more and found more information about Scott and what he was doing, the same name started to show up multiple times, and that was Boris Berezovsky.
Boris Berezovsky is known fairly widely in Russia as the godfather of the oligarchs.
How are you this morning?
Today worse than yesterday, but better than tomorrow.
He's part of that group of super rich Russian businessmen who made their spoils after the fall of communism in the kind of smash and grab era that came as Russia moved into its new capitalist economy. But there's another side of Boris Berezovsky which is extremely seedy and unpalatable. And he was linked to dangerous people. When we found out about Scott Young's connections with Boris Berezovsky, we knew that anyone who was known to be connected with Berezovsky was in danger.
Scott was, he was very secretive. And I think the fact he was having affairs and he didn't want, even though, he said he loved me, he was leading a double life. He didn't want me to know exactly where the money was and what he was doing. We got invited to dinner, and when we arrived, there was Boris Berezovsky. And that was when I first realised Scott had any involvement with Russians. Boris travelled with his wife of that time in one car, and then another car full of Secret Service bodyguards, because there'd already been attempts on his life.
Когда происходит вот такая трагедия, потому что действительно в 10 сантиметрах от меня передо мной оторвало голову моего водителя, да? И это не может не заставить серьезно задуматься вообще, так скажем, над смыслом жизни, вообще над тем, что ты делаешь. И для меня было, я думаю, как и для любого человека, который попадает в такую ситуацию, два выбора. Либо забиться в угол, либо воспринять то, что произошло, как просто подарок.
I said to Scott, be very careful mixing with the Russians. These are dangerous people. You're risking your life.